that South African television is boring. It seems as though every brand new show we get is either a soap opera, telenovela, or drama, or a loose adaptation of an international reality TV series.
We don't have normal black South African families being represented well. Every time we see something where there's a married couple, there's always infidelity, there's always skeletons in the closet, there's always financial impropriety, there's always drama. We don't have any solid black families.
Look, I feel like television right now, especially South African television, is not up to the level that it used to be. When I'm talking about television and South African television, I am talking about everything from soapies to drama to reality to variety to everything.
For me, my main issue is the writing. The writing pisses me. It's just copy and paste. Give me something original. The writing is so shallow.
It's the same thing. Taxi drama, gang violence, cash in transit heist, graphic sex scenes. Boo.
South Africa has some of the richest stories in the world. Stories shaped by history, struggle, love, power, and survival. Long before cameras and studios, stories were told around fires, passed down through voices, gestures, and imagination. Our ancestors didn't tell stories just to entertain. They told them to teach, to warn, and to stretch the imagination. Sitting together, listening, imagining worlds we could not see but deeply understood. Today, the medium has changed. We have television screens instead of fires, studios instead of open skies. And yet, when you turn on the TV, something feels familiar. Not because you've seen the show before, but because you've heard the story before. Different titles, different actors, different settings, but the conflict remains the same. This isn't an attack on South African television. It's an observation. Across multiple shows, genres, and platforms, the same emotional engine keeps repeating itself. The story may look different on the surface, but at its core, they're driven by the same ideas. Family tension, power struggle, secrets, money, and survival. Conflicts rarely end. It only mutates and stretches across seasons. You feel like you've seen this story before, even when the show is brand new. When we look at specific shows, the pattern becomes clearer. The Queen revolves around two families bound by wealth, crime, and betrayal, with drugs fueling the conflict. Kings of Joburg explores legacy and power within families, heightening the crime, mythology, and supernatural elements. How to Ruin Christmas compresses family tension into a single holiday, using tradition and expectation to bring the secrets to the surface. Uzalo examines family separation, loyalty, and the pool of criminal syndicates, constantly testing identity and belonging. Skin Sam follows ambition, legacy, and moral compromise as family ties and personal dreams collide. Isibaya centers on two families, the Zungu and the Ndlovu, with taxi drama acting as the engine that drives tension, loyalty, and rivalry across generations. Different genres, different tones, and different settings, but the story engine remains the same. If you strip away titles, costumes, and genre, the structure is clear. A family or two locked in a conflict, secrets threatening stability, money, power, and survival at the center, crime, betrayal, or addiction as fuel. In simple terms, a family in a conflict. Add drugs, you get the Queen. Add mythology and supernatural, it's Kings of Joburg. Place it in December and it becomes How to Ruin Christmas. Taxi drama and family rivalry, that's Isibaya. Same story, different fonts. Now let's shift perspective. To understand why repetition keeps happening, I spoke to directors working inside the South African television productions, people who are not theorizing from the outside, but navigating these systems every day. What they said doesn't dismiss the critique, it explains how it has become inevitable. Number one, studio sets and camera language. One of the first things they pointed out is where most South African dramas are shot. A large number of local dramas are filmed on a built studio set. not real locations. Once you're in a studio, your visual language immediately changes. Technically, this creates a very specific limitation. Most scenes are shot using the 180-degree rule, often in a 3-camera setup with cross-shooting between actors. Because of the setup, directors cannot freely move the camera around the space. A true 360-degree shot becomes almost impossible because turning too far reveals the edge of the set, the lights, or the crew. The illusion breaks. So instead of choosing a visual style, directors are often forced into one. Over time, these technical restrictions stop being invisible. They start shaping the identity of the shows themselves, not because anyone chooses sameness, but because the environment demands it. This is one of the reasons why many shows look the same. The second thing is budget as a creative limiter. Production houses are businesses. Every creative decision exists inside a financial reality. The size of the budget affects the type of equipment you can afford, the number of shooting days, the size of the crew, lighting quality, and image resolution. Directors explain that you might plan to shoot in 4K, but the budget only allows for HD. Even if the creative team wants higher quality, the finances simply don't support it. And it doesn't stop there. Some broadcasting channels themselves haven't upgraded their system. So even if you can shoot in 4K, the broadcaster may only accept HD. If you're aiming for that channel, you are forced to shoot for the system and not your vision. Creativity becomes something you must negotiate, not express freely. This affects all production houses, and over time, it narrows what feels possible. Number 3, rating-driven storytelling and copy-paste narratives. Another major factor is how channels study each other. Some broadcasters closely analyze what worked on another channel, which storylines cause a spike in viewership, which characters audiences respond to, which show peaks at certain times, and then they follow the same route. There's no copyright policy preventing formulas from being reused, so what succeeded once becomes a template. This is why stories repeat across channels. Actors appear on multiple shows doing similar roles. Popular stars circulate rapidly from one production to another. It's not a coincidence, it's strategy. The result is an industry that quietly rewards familiarity over originality. The fourth thing is that directors as executor and not author. This is where the comparison with international productions become important. In many international markets, directors are also screenwriters, producers, or deeply involved in development. Because of that, their vision travels from script to screen without being diluted. The story isn't lost in translations between departments. Locally, it's very different. South African directors are often limited by content structures. There's usually a content director who defines what the scene is about, decides what actors are meant to do, lock in major story beats before the director enters the process. In many cases, directors receive scripts late and are expected to execute rather than interpret. Most are not involved from pre-production through to post-production, which makes it extremely difficult to reshape scenes, pacing, or structure. You're directing inside boundaries you did not create. This is one of the reasons it's hard to tell who directed what. The system doesn't allow strong authorial fingerprints. Another consistent point was raised was time, or the lack of it. Most productions are constantly rushing to finish episodes, to meet broadcast schedules, to move on to the next scene. Because of this, moments that are meant to breathe, reflect, sit in silence, or allow emotions to land are rushed. You can see it in the final product. Scenes don't live long enough. Emotional beats are shortened so production can move forward. Silence, one of the most important tools in storytelling, is often removed entirely. The story keeps moving, but it doesn't always deepen. Number 6, complacency of the success. Directors also spoke at what happens once a show becomes successful. When a production has secured consistent viewership, the pressure to innovate drops. The thinking becomes, people will watch this anyway. Shows like Uzalo were mentioned not as exceptions, but as examples of what happens when effort turns into maintenance. When success is guaranteed, urgency disappears. The work continues, but the risks stop. And lastly, number 7, shared techniques, shared identity. Finally, there's a culture of sharing which starts out healthy. When a director discovers a shot or a technique that works, they often share it with the next director. That director then uses it on another production. Eventually, it spreads. What begins as collaboration slowly turns into repetition. Shots get reused, techniques becomes default, visual language flattens, not because people lack ideas, but because what worked feels safer than experimenting again. Now, what does this change about the conversation? What the director shared does not contradict the criticism of South African television. It completes it. The issue isn't that directors lack vision, it's that the system limits vision, rewards familiarity, and prioritizes speed over reflection. And the real tragedy isn't that our stories repeat, it's that the people capable of telling them differently are rarely given the time, authority, or space to try. Additional observations are that some of these shows, when placed side by side, scene by scene, could easily convince someone who's never watched any of them that they're watching a single series. Some producers and writers work across multiple shows, which naturally adds to the recurring similarities in tone, structure, and character behavior. Now, why does this matter? Across these shows, Black families are repeatedly framed as spaces of chaos, betrayal, and moral compromise. Family rarely appears as a place of stability or healing. Trauma, addiction, crime, and violence often drive the plot. Success is almost tied to moral compromise. Repetition of these storylines limits how audiences imagine themselves and how society perceives Black life. When one type of story dominates, it stops reflecting reality and starts defining it. Characters become trapped in cycles. Shock replaces substance and risk. The very thing that pushes culture forward is punished rather than rewarded. There's an important truth in this conversation, one we don't often talk about. For many South Africans, television is not chosen because it is the best option, but because it is the only option available. Free-to-air television is accessible in a way that streaming platforms are not. Data costs, subscription fees, and access to devices all shape what people are able to watch. So when certain shows attract a very high viewership, it isn't always because they are deeply loved. Sometimes it is simply because they are there. The smaller group of viewers, often with stable internet, smart devices, and disposable income, have access to global streaming platforms. They watch these shows with bigger budgets, different genres, slower pacing, and characters that change over time. As a result, their expectations shift. Not because they are better viewers, no, but because they're exposed to a more variety in storytelling. This creates two different viewing experiences. One group watches what is accessible, the other watches what is optional. When broadcasters look at ratings without acknowledging this difference, repetition starts to justify itself. Familiar stories appear successful not because they are creatively fulfilling, but because there is little competition at the same level of access. This is not a failure of the audience, it's a reflection of how inequality shapes imagination, choice, and storytelling. Now, as I conclude, South Africa does not suffer from a lack of stories. We never have. Long before television schedules, scripts, and seasons, our stories lived in memory. They were told through animals, ancestors, gods, and ordinary people. They warned us, challenged us, and invited us to imagine differently. What we are seeing in our screens today is not the absence of creativity, but the repetition of safety. The same structures return because they are familiar. Family conflict, power struggles, crime as momentum, trauma as fuel. Over time, these patterns stop reflecting reality and begin defining it. When one version of Black life dominates on screen, it quietly limits how we imagine ourselves. And yet, understanding why these patterns exist changes the conversation. The director's perspective revealed that sameness is not always laziness, it's often structural. Studio limitations, budget ceilings, ratings pressure, time constraints, and muted creative control all shape what eventually reaches our screens. The system does not just influence the stories, it quietly decides which stories feel possible. But the system is not permanent. They're built by people and can be questioned by people. If the storytelling is meant to do more than maintain attention, if it's meant to expand imagination, then the next step is to look beyond execution and ask deeper questions about decision making, power, and risks. If these stories feel familiar to you, add your voices below. Like this video if the conversation matters to you. Subscribe if you want more deep dives into shows and films that are shaping our world. Until next time.